Welcome back to the Vale Echo. Today, we uncover one of the most disturbing and heartbreaking true stories in UK history, the tragic tale of a young girl whose light was cruelly taken by those she once called friends. This is the story of Suzanne Capper, a name that still echoes through the shadows of Manchester's past. It begins in the early 1990s, a time of bright hopes and simpler dreams. Susan was just a teenage girl growing up in a quiet Manchester neighborhood, her smile wide and full of life. She was kind, trusting, and often seen walking to school with her friends, her backpack bouncing with every step. Life for Susan was ordinary: laughter, music, and dreams of a brighter tomorrow. But behind that familiar normality, something sinister was quietly waiting to strike. Just a few streets away stood a small, rundown council house, nothing special, just another corner of working-class England. But within its walls, a dangerous group of young people had begun to spiral out of control. They spent their days drifting through chaos, the room filled with smoke, the glow of a flickering TV, and arguments that never seemed to end. There was anger there, anger that needed someone to blame. And soon, that someone would be Suzanne. At first, she visited the house like anyone else, trusting, friendly, and eager to belong. She didn't see the warning signs, the cold stares, the whispered threats, the growing tension that thickened the air. One evening, as rain began to fall across Manchester, Suzanne found herself inside that same house again. But this time, something felt different. The laughter was gone. The smiles had turned sharp. The door closed behind her with a heavy thud. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating, the dim bulbs swinging from the ceiling, shadows stretching across the walls. The room was cluttered, the walls stained with neglect. The group, once just troubled young people, had turned darker, meaner. Their eyes were filled with something Suzanne couldn't understand: pure hatred. As she sat there, confusion and fear began to creep in. The voices grew louder, the faces crueler. What began as teasing soon twisted into something sinister. Suzanne's heart raced, but she stayed silent, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. But the truth was much darker. She had unknowingly walked into a place where innocence would be destroyed and humanity would vanish. The flickering TV played static in the background, the noise blending with the echo of mocking laughter. Suzanne's reflection caught in the broken mirror nearby, eyes wide, unsure, afraid. That was the last moment the world would ever see her as she once was, a normal girl with a gentle smile and big dreams. And as the night deepened, the first sparks of unimaginable cruelty began to flicker in the dark. The door had closed, the light had faded, and Suzanne Capper's nightmare had just begun. The door shut behind Suzanne, and the air inside the house grew heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. A single bulb swung gently from the ceiling, casting long, trembling shadows across the filthy room. The faint hum of a broken television filled the silence, its static light flashing across the faces of those who surrounded her. What had once been a place of aimless laughter had now transformed into a chamber of cruelty. Susan sat trembling in the chair, the ropes tight around her wrists. Fear shimmered in her eyes, confusion flooding her mind. These were people she knew, people she once trusted, yet the warmth of friendship had turned to ice. The group circled her, their faces twisted by anger and envy. The leader stared down at her with a cold smirk, eyes void of empathy. Each word they spoke dripped with venom, as if destroying her spirit had become their entertainment. The bulb flickered again, illuminating the chaos, cigarette smoke swirling through the air, dirty walls smeared with grime, laughter echoing like a sick joke. Suzanne's cries blended with the sound of the television's static, a haunting rhythm of fear and despair. But outside, the world carried on. Cars passed by. Rain hit the pavement. No one knew what horror was unfolding behind those thin walls. Inside, the cruelty deepened. There was no humanity left, only darkness feeding on fear. Suzanne's pleas were met with mocking laughter. Her voice grew weak, yet her eyes still begged for mercy, for someone to remember she was just a child. The faces around her, once familiar, now looked monstrous under the dim light. They weren't just hurting her body, they were trying to destroy her soul. In a corner of the room lay a broken doll, its porcelain face cracked, a silent reflection of Suzanne's innocence, shattered by those who had chosen evil. The candlelight danced across its broken features as if mourning her silently. Days turned into an endless blur of torment and isolation. The walls closed in, the air stifling, but deep within her a flicker of will remained. Suzanne refused to let the darkness consume her completely. One night, as the group slept or wandered off, she saw her chance. The ropes were loose. Her trembling hands worked against them until, finally, freedom. She staggered toward the door, every step a battle between life and death. The house groaned behind her as though it didn't want to let her go. She pushed open the door, greeted by cold night air and the sound of rain. Barefoot, weak, and in unbearable pain, she began to walk. The countryside road stretched ahead, endless, misty, and silent. Each step was a miracle, each breath a victory. The dawn began to break, soft light piercing the mist, but her strength was fading fast. She collapsed by a wooden fence, her voice barely a whisper. Still, she called for help, and this time someone heard. A passing motorist stopped, his eyes widening at the sight of her. He ran to her side, dialing for help as Suzanne's faint voice trembled through the cold air. For the first time in days, she was no longer alone. But the nightmare she escaped would soon reveal horrors far beyond imagination. The faint light of dawn stretched over the countryside as the motorist knelt beside Suzanne. Her voice was fragile, trembling through the cold morning air. He wrapped his jacket around her, his hands shaking as he called for help. Within minutes, sirens pierced the silence, red and blue lights flashing through the mist. Paramedics rushed to her side, their faces tightening with shock as they saw the extent of her suffering. Suzanne was lifted carefully onto a stretcher, her body weak, her spirit flickering between life and death. In the hospital, doctors fought tirelessly to save her. The bright fluorescent lights cut through the darkness that had consumed her for days. Machines beeped softly, the air filled with urgency and hope. As the team worked, Suzanne opened her eyes for a brief moment. Her voice was faint but clear. She whispered the names of her attackers. She wanted justice. She wanted the world to know what they had done. Outside the hospital, police officers gathered every detail she managed to give. Within hours, investigators surrounded the house where her torment had taken place. The front door creaked open to reveal a nightmare frozen in time, the flickering bulb, the cluttered mess, and the heavy scent of evil lingering in the air. Flashlights cut across the darkness as officers documented every corner, bloodstains, ropes, and burned remnants of cruelty. Evidence was collected piece by piece, and soon the names Suzanne had spoken led them straight to the people responsible. When the arrests were made, the streets of Manchester filled with disbelief. Neighbors who once saw these young people as ordinary were now staring at monsters. Each suspect was dragged into custody, their faces cold, showing no remorse. The city's heart ached for Suzanne, and the nation waited for the truth to unfold. In the courtroom, silence hung heavy as the details emerged. The group sat before the judge, eyes blank, their evil laid bare for the world to see. The prosecution painted a picture so horrifying that even the most hardened listeners wept. Suzanne's name echoed through those halls of justice, a reminder of innocence lost and the darkness that humans can create. When the final verdict came, justice roared through the courtroom. Life sentences were handed down. The monsters who had destroyed Suzanne's life would never walk free again, yet no sentence could erase the pain, no punishment could bring back the laughter that once filled her world. Days later, the community gathered at a small memorial. Candles flickered softly beside Suzanne's photograph, a smiling girl forever frozen in time. Flowers surrounded her picture and tears fell like rain as people whispered prayers for her peace. As the camera pans out, the sun rises over Manchester once more, light breaking through the clouds, washing the city in gold. Suzanne Capper's story became a symbol of strength, of awareness, and of the desperate need for kindness in a world that can be cruel. Her light may have been taken, but her memory still shines, a voice from the shadows reminding us all that evil can destroy, but truth endures forever.